But one of the things that's been pissing me off recently, whenever I post something on social media regarding, whatever, child brides or something, then there'll be a whole bunch of ridiculous Jew haters that usually it's almost always the same meme. It's sort of a bunch of quotes from various parts of the Talmud where it says something that's reprehensible. Or you can lay in bed with a 2-year old or whatever it is. I never know if it is true or not, or if it's taken out of context or not. Well, first of all, are you familiar with the types of memes I'm talking about?
Disclaimer. This video contains discussion of antisemitism and includes an example of an anti-Semitic meme shown for the purpose of critique, analysis, and educational commentary. The intent is to debunk harmful misinformation, not to promote or endorse any hateful ideas. Yes, I am. And I'm happy to say I've been working on a massive project dedicated to debunking these kinds of memes. So when I saw Gad Saad mention the issue recently, I was genuinely glad to see it's gaining more attention. In fact, in the clip you'll see shortly, he specifically brings up the importance of refuting these viral memes. It's encouraging to know I'm not the only one thinking along these lines. Though, as far as I know, very few people are actually doing the work to break these things down piece by piece. The meme Gad Saad is referring to looks something like this. I found this in under 5 seconds just by typing Talmud into the search bar on X, formerly Twitter. That's how widespread this stuff is. And the people sharing it? They're relentless, smug, and often completely detached from facts. Let me be absolutely clear. The content in these memes is almost always outright false, ripped out of context, or deliberately twisted. Take the example in this one. It cites something called Gad Saad, which, funnily enough, sounds a bit like Gad Saad, but here's the thing. Gad Saad doesn't exist. Not in the Talmud, not in Judaism, not anywhere. It's completely made up, fabricated from thin air. So what does that tell you about the people posting these memes? They're not interested in truth. They're not quoting real texts or trying to understand what Jews actually believe. They're just spreading propaganda, designed to provoke, mislead, and stir up hatred. Now, to be fair, I'm not saying everything in the Talmud is morally perfect. It's not. The Talmud is a vast, ancient collection of discussions, legal debates, and commentary spanning centuries. It contains disagreement, context, and nuance. It's not a book where you flip to a random line and treat it like divine instruction. That's just not how it works. So even if someone finds a troubling or strange quote, that doesn't mean it's authoritative, or that anyone today even follows it. And throughout this series, I'm going to explain why these memes are dishonest, how the Talmud actually functions, and why this entire line of attack completely misrepresents Jewish thought and tradition. Stay tuned. We're just getting started.
Have you
Of
seen?
course, of
Yes.
course.
Do you not think that it might be worthwhile for someone, it may not be you, you may not be the right Talmudic scholar, but to sort of, and of course, people will ignore it. The Jew haters will ignore the definitive rebuttal. But it seems like, so I don't know enough about that particular quote from a particular edict in the Talmud to say that it's BS or not. And therefore, since I have epistemic humility, I know what I know and I know what I don't know, then I won't traverse that minefield. But it seems to me that these types of memes are so prevalent that someone should take the time to just offer rebuttals to all of these. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a fantastic idea, Dr. Saad. And as it happens, I've actually been working on that very project for months. I'm putting together a whole series of videos directly refuting these memes, one by one, with clear, sourced responses. Now, let me be upfront. I'm not a Talmudic scholar, but I do know far more than the average person, and I've studied this subject long enough to say with confidence that I can debunk these claims accurately. And that matters, because if I were to take this on without sufficient knowledge and mess it up, I'd end up doing more harm than good. The good news is, I'm not starting from scratch. There are already Jewish scholars, rabbis, and educators who have done amazing work on this topic. Some have even written books addressing many of the exact claims these memes repeat. The problem? Most people won't read those books. They won't sit down and do the research. That's where I come in, and hopefully others too, to take that material and make it accessible, understandable, and easy to share. But let me tell you, even with my background and experience, this still takes a lot of time. It takes careful reading, fact-checking, and cross-referencing. And if it's this hard for someone who already knows a lot, just imagine how overwhelming it must be for someone new to the topic. That's why I believe this project is important. and I hope you agree. If you do, please consider supporting my channel. Like, comment, share, become a member, whatever you can do to help spread this work. Because people need access to good information, and right now, bad information is winning the meme war. Let's change that.
It's a great question. I've literally thought about this exact question before. So on the one hand, I have personally retweeted or reposted, whatever we're calling it these days, some threads that do exactly this. So there's this one account. This guy lives in New York City. I honestly cannot remember his name. It's not a high volume account. I think he has maybe 3,000 followers or so, but he has done exactly this. He's an Orthodox Jew. He's learned in Talmud, and he tries to systematically debunk some of this. And I'm oftentimes inclined to repost this. On the other hand, I get worried. I get worried about Jews feeling the need to defend the legitimacy of the Talmud.
Why should you get worried about that? The Talmud itself says, "Know what to answer a heretic." And according to many commentaries, this isn't even referring to internal Jewish debates. It's also about how to respond to non-Jewish critics, or, more broadly, anyone spreading false religious claims. Now, I'm using the word heretic here in a broad sense, not as an insult, but simply to describe someone promoting falsehoods or distortions about Judaism and Jewish texts. And in our time, with more freedom of speech and expression than at almost any point in history, we have both the opportunity and the responsibility to speak up. Because let's be honest, it is a disaster that people genuinely believe that Jews condone child abuse based on the Talmud. It is a disaster that people believe Jews think non-Jews are subhuman. These are not just wild lies. They are dangerous, dehumanizing, and historically deadly lies. This is not just about correcting misinformation. These false ideas about Jewish belief fuel hatred. They dehumanize Jews in the minds of the public. And when people believe these things, when they think Jews are okay with abusing children or view others as animals, what do you think the next step is? Do you think they're going to respect Jews, treat them as equal citizens? Or are they going to respond with hostility, exclusion, or even violence, like we've tragically seen in previous generations? We've seen what happens when these kinds of lies go unchallenged. We've seen where unchecked anti-Semitism leads. And that's why we must refute these claims, not just for accuracy, but for safety, for dignity, and for the moral sanity of society. This isn't optional. It's urgent.
The Talmud is just our tradition says that the Talmud is just the oral Torah, is just the component of God's revelation to Moses at Mount Sinai that was not actually codified in the Torah. There was an oral component. And the only reason that it gets written down is after the destruction of the Second Temple, when it became a literal necessity because the Jews were not living there in the land of Israel anymore there. So
here's the traditional story. God gave not only the written Torah at Mount Sinai, but also an oral Torah, a set of general principles, explanations, and interpretations that were supposedly passed down orally from generation to generation. The explanation goes that, due to persecution and the fear that this knowledge might be lost, the sages eventually wrote it down, first the Mishnah and later the Gemara, which together form the main components of the Talmud. Now, I've studied this claim carefully, and I find the evidence for the oral Torah being given at Sinai, in the way Orthodox Judaism teaches, to be deeply unconvincing. Let's start with something very basic. Not one verse in the entire Hebrew Bible explicitly mentions an oral Torah given at Sinai. Not one. You can search all of Tanakh, and you won't find a single prophet or narrative describing a sacred oral tradition being passed down alongside the written Torah. Think about that. If this oral Torah was as central as orthodoxy claims, why didn't any of the prophets mention it? Why no reference to the importance of tefillin, mezuzah, or the obligation to uphold the oral tradition among the prophets? That silence is not a small oversight. It's strong evidence that the oral Torah, at least in its current form, is a later development, a product of rabbinic evolution, not divine revelation at Sinai. And this matters. It really matters. Because when the Talmud and halachic tradition are framed as having divine origin, it becomes much harder to question or reform anything, even when something is clearly broken. Take the issue of the aguna, the chained wife who is unable to obtain a religious divorce without the husband's consent. People argue that nothing can be done because this is halacha, based on the Torah and passed down through the sages. But when you can't change unjust outcomes because of a rigid view of divine authority, real people suffer. This is the cost of treating later rabbinic tradition as untouchable, especially when the historical and scriptural evidence doesn't support its divine origin. In fact, the absence of evidence in the written Torah and the lack of prophetic references point clearly to the idea that the oral Torah, as we know it today, was developed later and shaped over time by scholars trying to apply ancient law to evolving realities. So unless we want to believe that something this central was just mysteriously kept secret for centuries, even by the prophets, we have to be willing to admit the obvious. The oral Torah did not exist at Sinai in the form that orthodoxy claims. That doesn't mean the Talmud has no value. It is extremely valuable, but it does mean we should approach it critically, not blindly, and certainly not as if it has a divine status. If we truly care about truth and morality, we should follow the evidence where it leads. And in this case, it leads away from the Sinai narrative.
I get skittish about that. And traditionally, this has not always ended well, actually. So there was something called the Disputation of Paris. I believe was in the 13th century. The king of France was not a big fan of the Jews and essentially called for a grand debate between one of the Jews' representatives, one of the great Chachamim, one of the great rabbis there in France at that time, and a leading a Catholic theologian. And it was rigged, obviously, the debate, and surprise, surprise, the Jews lost. And as a result of that, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of Talmuds and various Jewish holy books that were just ceremoniously burned in the city streets there. So I get a little leery of this, looking at the history, but I hear you. It's something that I've thought about myself.
I've actually heard an Orthodox rabbi make this exact same point about avoiding debates, and he too brought up the disputations to justify it. But with all due respect, I find that reasoning deeply flawed. As even he acknowledged, those medieval disputations were rigged from the start. Jews were forced into debates under the threat of violence, expulsion, or death. It was never a fair exchange of ideas. It was coerced theater with life or death consequences. But that's not our situation today. There is no inquisition, no king standing over us with the threat of exile. Jews today, especially in the West, have freedom of speech, legal protections, and access to the public square. Even if we were to lose a debate today, no one is going to burn the Talmud, and even if they tried, we live in the age of digital copies and printing presses. The Talmud isn't going anywhere. Back then, burning a Talmud was catastrophic because each volume was handwritten and irreplaceable. The risk isn't the same today because of modern technology. And as I said earlier, it is unacceptable for people to go on believing evil things about the Jewish people, especially when those lies have the power to dehumanize, radicalize, and incite violence, just as they have in previous generations. So no, invoking the disputations is not a valid reason to avoid engaging in public debates or refuting dangerous claims. Respectfully, I believe that kind of caution, while understandable, is misguided in today's context. And to be clear, I'm not attacking Hammer personally. I respect much of his work. But on this point, I strongly disagree. If anything, the history of the disputations should remind us why we must speak out. Because back then, Jews had no power, no voice, and no platform. Today we do. So let's use it.
I'm very much of two minds on. I'm a little torn on the question there, but there are some people out there that are doing this, but they're not necessarily the highest volume accounts. Ultimately, Gad, I'm skeptical that this would do a whole lot of good, to be honest with you, because I think a lot of people that are criticizing the Talmud there, they're not actually. They don't care about what the Talmud says. They're just going for a very cheap shot against the Jews.
This misunderstands the main purpose of debate and refutations. The purpose of refutations and debate is not necessarily to convince the person who's making the false claims, it's to convince the audience. The viewers are who we are trying to reach. Those who believe or are susceptible to believing the lies about the Talmud, we want to reach them. It's true we probably won't have much success with the dedicated liars, but those who are just unsure or mistaken, we can reach them. Anyway, as the sages teach, it is not up to you to finish the work, neither are you at liberty to desist from it. We must try even if we don't succeed. The goal of refutations and debate isn't always to convince the person we're directly arguing with, it's to reach the audience. That's who we're really speaking to. The viewers, the listeners, the readers. We're aiming for those who are susceptible to misinformation, those who may be undecided or uncertain, or who have only seen one side and don't know what to believe. These are the people we can actually reach, and we must. Sure, the hardcore liars and the truly committed anti-Semites probably aren't going to change their minds. but the people who are just mistaken, misinformed, or genuinely searching for truth. They're watching, and they deserve answers. Moreover, there's always a chance, however small, that even the liars might be moved by what we say. But if we say nothing, that chance drops to zero.
Talmud is basically a series of arguments. I mean, I've been doing Daf Yomi, which is the daily Talmud learning cycle, for the past 5 years now. Literally every single page of Talmud are various rabbis very much disagreeing with each other, oftentimes in very heated and personal terms, actually, which is kind of humorous. There's a whole book, by the way, it's literally a whole book called Talmudic Insults. It's like the best insults from the Talmud.
Now, I say this with respect, and I really don't want to be harsh toward Hammer, but I have to be honest. I consider Daf Yomi to be a poor use of time for most people. Reading the Talmud straight, page by page, is incredibly difficult, time-consuming, and often overwhelming. The Talmud is not structured like a modern book. It's filled with tangents, debates, and scattered rulings across thousands of pages. Unless you already have deep background knowledge, it's hard to gain practical insight this way. And I say this with no intent to offend, but the truth is, much of the Talmud simply isn't essential for modern life. There's a vast amount of content that, while historically and religiously significant, isn't directly relevant to the challenges most people face today. That's why, in my experience, it's far more useful to read books about Judaism, especially those written by scholars or rabbis who extract and explain the most meaningful and applicable sections of the Talmud with clear commentary. These books make complex ideas accessible, practical, and engaging. Rather than getting bogged down in one daf a day, it's often more valuable to explore how core Talmudic principles are interpreted and applied to contemporary questions, giving us a way to bring that wisdom into real life. Again, I say this with no disrespect. I understand that Daf Yomi has meaning for many, but in terms of educational efficiency, there are far better paths.
Judaism is not necessarily the
I
biggest.
must come from that tradition.
Yeah.
Some of my insults are poetic on social media.
Right. So, Judaism, say what you will, it's not necessarily the biggest proponent of keeping discourse at all times civil. I mean, if you got to make your point in a heated fashion, then sometimes that is very much called for. But anyway, those are kind of my thoughts on the question there. I'm very much of a split mind on it, but I'm inclined towards thinking that it might do more harm than good, honestly.
I have to disagree. We don't apply this logic to anything else. We actively refute woke ideology, communist ideology, anti-free speech rhetoric, conspiracy theories, and more. So why should anti-Jewish lies be the one thing we tiptoe around or leave unanswered? Here's the reality. If we don't refute it, people simply won't have the answers. And that's dangerous. There are sincere people out there who want to know the truth, but they don't have the tools or background to sift through Jewish texts and sources to find it. If we don't step in and make this information accessible and understandable, then the lies will win by default. And we can't let that happen. That's why I'll be moving forward with this project, debunking anti-Jewish memes, along with other harmful nonsense like anti-vax propaganda, Islamist extremism, and other ideologically toxic content. I'm committed to exposing falsehoods and defending truth. So please subscribe, like, comment, and share. I plan to upload 2 to 3 videos per week, and I look forward to building this journey together with you. Let's challenge the lies, bring clarity, and speak truth boldly. Thanks for listening.